I'd like to warmly welcome all of you to our session today on the future of Europe. I think after 2 days of discussing about the new normal, about multilateralism and multipolarity, it's a very good place to be to look at where Europe is. I'm an eternal optimist, and so when I saw that future was added to the word Europe, I said nothing could be better. After 3 decades of looking at Europe, I think it's a good point this morning with this very distinguished panel over here, which needs no introduction. We are going to do the following. I'll have very short impulses from our 5 panelists over here and get into a much more interactive session. Let me just point out that Europe has given us a lot to think about from 1648, which continues to be the enduring template about the state, which is the most critical actor in international relations, the way we design international law and institutions and participation. I think what Europe has done is something unprecedented. While the rest of the world in the post-45 period has been much more nationalistic in the sense of how it designs and examines itself, Europe in that sense was able to move beyond and offer a new idea. And I think it is with that sense that one has always looked at Europe to its ability to innovate, redefine, and reinvent itself. And I think in an age of globalization, we're going to be increasingly confronted with this question that all states will continue to grapple with, is how do you look at what your state capacities are? Can you come together and connect? Because we are in an interconnected world where probably uncertainty and disruption is the new normal. And how is it that then can we find common solutions? And in that sense, Europe offered a very unprecedented way of putting together, differences behind and creating a new normal, which for them has become normal. For us is something which we can't think about, especially in Asia, and that is about sharing sovereignty. With those words, I'd like to introduce our panel. To my left, I have Geoffrey, a British Member of Parliament. I hope I got that right. We have Madam Sujata Singh here, Secretary West. To my right, I have Christian Leffler, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the European External Action Service. We have Jozsef Czukor, Foreign Policy Advisor to the Prime Minister of Hungary. And last but not the least, Stephen Blockmans, who's the head of the foreign policy at the Center for European Policy in Brussels. May I now ask, Christian, what do you think where you are, the future of Europe, from where you see it?
All right. Thank you. Let me try to situate this question in the context of the overall theme of this conference on multilateralism and multipolarity. Over the last 2 days, I think we've heard a lot about the turbulent world we live in, about the uncertainties, the threats, the challenges that we face. That is obviously true for Europe as well. We face our own challenges, or our own share of these challenges. We were impacted strongly by the international economic and financial crisis. We have a lot of conflict in our neighborhood, on our doorstep. We've suffered terrorist attacks in the last couple of years. We've also got many internal challenges, the most obvious, which was discussed yesterday, handling the departure of the United Kingdom from the European Union and redefining the relationship between the UK and the EU. But despite all these issues, the uncertainties and challenges, the EU is not retreating or turning in on itself. It has remained throughout and still remains open to the world, committed to multilateral approaches and to international cooperation. We remain the biggest trader, the biggest investor, the biggest donor of development assistance in the world, but it goes well beyond economics as well. Looking at other policy areas, looking at political and security cooperation, both soft and hard security. Over the past 10 years, 15 years, cooperation has been stepped up between the EU and the UN and NATO, and other organizations like the African Union, and the EU has developed its own capacity to deploy missions. So far, 28 security and stability missions, 14 of them active for the moment around the world. Last year, the High Representative Vice President of the Commission, Federica Mogherini, presented the global strategy on EU foreign and security policy to the leaders of the EU, who gave it their endorsement, and we're now busy putting it into effect. The idea there was very much to mobilize all the instruments we have across the board, policies and instruments, in support of our external projection. In doing so, and I'll finish with that by way of introduction, we're reaffirming very strongly our commitment to multilateralism. And I think that's coming back to the theme of this conference. As we move to a more pronouncedly multipolar world, multilateralism becomes even more important as part of the solution. It's important to work towards what I would call cooperative multilateralism rather than competitive or conflictual multipolarity. And that is very much where the EU is heading as an international partner.
Thank you, Christian, for that very sharp intervention. I'd like to turn to Geoffrey and ask you, how do you see Europe and the future given where you are located?
I'm a British member of the European Parliament. The German ambassador, I don't know if he's here, but got upset yesterday when I said to him I saw my role as going to Brussels to represent the British people in the European Parliament. They elect me, and that's who I speak up for. I did not see it as my role to promote the European project. The German ambassador thought that was quite wrong. He thought MEPs all ought to be promoting the European Union. I have to say, of course, there are a lot of good things about the European Union, but there are a lot of things which are seriously wrong. Prime Minister Theresa May, when she spoke yesterday, was very clear. We want the European Union to succeed, but we want a different sort of relationship with it to the one that we've had. Let me clarify one point, first of all. There seems to be confusion that the EU is Europe. It's not. There are 20 states in Europe that are not members of the European Union. There are organizations such as NATO, which, although they have some good working relationships from time to time, it's entirely separate from the European Union. And the United Kingdom, of course, when it leaves the European Union, remains geophysically, culturally, part of Europe. And we will be part of NATO. And we will continue to play a strong role in that sort of organization. And we want a good, strong, amicable relationship with the European Union. Foreign Secretary Jaishankar yesterday remarked that it was absurd that the United Nations Security Council had remained unchanged from 70 years ago. Well, I think you could say exactly the same about the European Union and its predecessor of 60 years ago. In other words, what now they talk about as the four sacrosanct freedoms of the European Union were concepts that were devised 40 years ago, 60 years ago rather, for entirely different purposes. And they need revising. And I would say, for example, that the whole concept of free movement is not sustainable in today's world. And we're seeing across many countries in Europe a reaction to this whole idea of free movement. Is going to have to change in the European Union, and this has been one of the prime causes of people in the United Kingdom voting for Brexit, because they were very concerned, among other things, about the whole concept of free movement. So I would say that the European Union, we hope it will survive, we hope it will be strong in the future, but it needs to change dramatically, and above all, and of course I would say this as a Brit, it needs to ensure that the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union is positive, constructive, amicable, to the best interests of both the British people and the peoples of the countries of the European Union.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Could I like turn and invite Jozsef, one of the newer member states, not so new anymore, 2004. How do you see, the future of Europe? And Geoffrey just pointed out, please don't think that EU equals Europe. What are your concerns from where you see it?
So, thank you very much. First of all, my part is not so easy as that one of Christian, because he was speaking about the external issues of the European Union. And no, we are sitting here in the podium, ladies and gentlemen, 4 Europeans, and in front of us an Asian audience, and we represent the family. And it would be not a good manner if I would criticize all the internal family problems we have in the European Union. But because I was asked to say something about Europe's future, I have to say something about our family and our problems within this family. Indeed, Hungary is not anymore such a young member of the EU. As you know, we joined the EU 2004, and it was a very prosperous period of the European Union. How could we imagine that the EU is ready to integrate 10 new member countries, 8 of them coming from the former communist bloc, and this integration is a success story. And this is not the reason why the family has no problems, because the EU enlarged themselves. But the problems started to affect us 2008. Christian mentioned some of these problems. I do not want to cite him and repeat him, but would like to make my point that all in all, the debt crisis, the euro crisis, and later on last year, or the year before last, the migration crisis, this is not a refugee crisis, this is a migration crisis, affect us in a way that a lot of European citizens, a high number of our family members, if you want, started losing his or her beliefs in the success of the European Union. We have a problem of legitimacy. The European Union, the family, is divided in 2 groups. A big one of the member states, group of member states, are sovereignist. Hungary belongs to this group of the member states. We think that we have to rebalance the relationship between institutions and member states. Just to give you an example, we always said, and I learned it when I was a younger diplomat, I'm unfortunately not anymore, that the EU can only answer the problems of the global economy and its own problems with deepening. And now we have to realize that the ever closer union, also it is a part of the Lisbon Treaty, but it is not always the right answer for tackling global and homemade problems in the European Union. For example, my country says that we have to come back to that what the founding fathers said, why we created 60 years ago the European Union. And it was the goal that we wanted to guarantee freedom, stability, prosperity in Europe. We wanted to create a Europe where we can organize in a better way, learning from the catastrophes of the 20th century, the cooperation between the member countries. But to the cooperation belongs also solidarity and a greater understanding from the national problems of every member state. So the sovereignists say that we have to strengthen the member state. For example, economic problems, how we can create new jobs, how we can boost economic growth. My country belongs to a fast developing part, probably the fastest developing part of Europe. Whole Central Europe has a growth rate over 4% or even higher, for example, in the Czech Republic or in Poland. But the measures we have to use have to decide in the member states. So, because the time is running, probably one point. The problems the EU facing are great, but if I put my main message in one sentence, in one message, we have to adjust our conflict-solving mechanisms to the changed social and economic relations in the world. This is our latest weakness, our greatest weakness. And we have to overcome the shock of the Brexit. Brexit is a shock, and Hungary, especially Hungary, and a high number of member countries are very sad that our British friends are leaving us. Who could imagine 10 years ago that the European Union will have a period when the second biggest economy of the EU decides, and the strongest military power and the very important NATO partner, probably after the United States, the most important one, decides to leave us. So we have to learn from it, and we have to avoid strong voices. We have to see that the only chance is to create a Europe, a stronger Europe, which is better than the previous one, and find a way to have as close as it is possible cooperation with the UK. Europe has a perspective. Our success story, and that's why I'm mentioning, because I'm representing a new member country, is the enlargement. Where we could manage enlargement in Europe, we were able to manage to extend the region of stability on our old continent. So that's why we need to have more braveness, and I'm quite sure that the family is strong enough and we are going to solve our own problems very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jozsef. Thank you for being so open to say that, even if you're a family, families do have problems. And I think if you put it on the table, it's a better way to move it ahead. After having heard the three practitioners, I'd like to invite Stevens to, comment on how do you see it for somebody who's been looking at Europe for so long, being part of it, beyond the navel gazing and saying enlargement was a regenerating factor. But how is Project Europe faring today?
Well, it's true. I mean, sitting in Brussels, you have a tendency of navel gazing, but sitting here in New Delhi and looking at the European Union from the outside, Steelers Wheel, famous song from the 1970s, comes to mind. Clowns to the left, jokers to the right, stuck in the middle with you. And if you look to the left, I think we saw one of our immediate neighbors to be, represented here yesterday. Listening to Boris Johnson's sales pitch to Mother India, I thought I was walking as Alice in Wonderland. And like Steelers Wheel's singer falling off my chair. Of course, with all of his wit, Bojo is one of the most eloquent amidst what to my mind is a maddening crowd of freestyling politicians. He doesn't take facts that seriously. He's been criticized as a former reporter for the Daily Telegraph in Brussels by his own peers as well as Tory party members for doing that. And I don't even want to recall the £350 million that will be rediverted from contributions to the EU to the National Health Service. What struck me is that in Theresa May's speech 2 days ago, UK, and again in Boris Johnson's speech, UK free trade with the rest of the world is put at a premium. And as Bojo said, not to be negotiated before 2019 until the UK leaves the EU, or longer, mind you, if it crashes out of the EU without the legal straps attached, the transitional arrangements to assure that Indian goods and services transiting through the UK towards the single market, unless that legal regime remains unclear. So, I mean, in Lala Brexit land, ideology trumps economics. And well, further to the left, geographically speaking, that is, it's the other way around. We heard yesterday as well. Economic calculations, not necessarily facts, trump ideology. So transactional Trumponomics are expected to color US diplomacy, but Trump's brand of populism is less funny, to my mind, potentially more violent, a bit like Clockwork Orange. To the right of the European Union, Putin's Russia. Now, yesterday morning, it took jaundiced humor and mental discipline to discern the reality in some of Mr. Nikonov's statements about the war in eastern Ukraine and the absence of of Russian troops in that war. Let's not forget that Putin himself awarded the Medal for Distinction in Combat to soldiers returning from Donbass, thereby putting lie to his own claims that Russia was not involved in the war. And the operative in the Kremlin poses a danger for liberal democracy in Europe, as indeed the US. And his brand of Lilliputins is spreading around the continent, undermining the values on which the EU is built. Which brings me to my last point, the stuck in the middle with you part, wondering what to do. Well, in a panel on the future of Europe, I think the EU should do three things. One, it should maintain unity, and here I'm in full agreement with the previous speaker. It's the unified position that will allow small states in this world, and all of the EU member states are small, even Little Britain in the world will discover this. We represent less than 7% of the global population, soon also 7% of the global GDP. So unity is a premium. And that means that, and that would be my second point, that the EU needs to counter the narrative of the populists. Like in the Soviet Union's case, I think the collapse of the European Union could be, it's no longer unthinkable, could be the unimaginable or the unintended consequence, rather, of the Union's long-term dysfunctioning, meddling tendencies, misguided reforms, compounded by the elite's misreading of political dynamics. Some have already written obituaries for the European Union. I think they're premature and they're also unwarranted. The intricate web which has been woven so tightly, an intricate web of socioeconomic relations between member states of the European Union, has been woven so tightly over the past 6 decades. It has produced so many benefits for citizens, companies, states alike, even recognized in the so-called Balance of Competences review that David Cameron commissioned from his own administration, but then chose to ignore for political reasons. The web of socioeconomic interests has been woven so tightly that it would be counterproductive to those actors, as indeed very costly, as the Brits will discover, and the Financial Times have already calculated for them, to crash out of that European Union and to reproduce the levels and standards of living, the acquired rights over the last 6 decades, which Europeans have become so accustomed to. So the European Union, in that sense, needs to show added value, and it does provide added value, both in terms of bringing prosperity to its citizens, as well as soft and hard security. Steps have been taken in 2016 as a result of the crises which are affecting the European Union. Obviously, much more needs to be done. This is a work at 28 still, maybe 27 in the future. Takes a long time to come to compromise, step by step, but I think in this multipolar world, multilateralism at a European level and certainly at an international level is the only way to remain wedded to the idea of open borders and free movement in all of its guises. Thank you.
Thank you, Stevens. With that, I'd like to turn and bring in Sujata Mehta here. We've had a long historical and now a very contemporary relation with Europe, a strategic partnership, looking ahead. How do you see both these ideational partners?
Thank you, Salma. I'm happy to have this opportunity to offer a non-European and a specifically Indian perspective on this subject. In contemporary times, I think Europe has been projected and regarded as the most successful example of regional integration. The fact is that the integration of Europe has been pursued through a multiplicity of institutions. There are many layers. There's the European Union is the prime one. There's the Council of Europe, there's the OSCE, there's the WEU, and there are countless others. And that has been something that in other parts of the world has always intrigued us, that some of these almost tend to have similar agendas, but it has been found useful to pursue regional integration or European coordination, European concordance through these multiple layers. And that, I think, has been an interesting experiment, because in most other parts of the world, pursuing and maintaining even a single regional integration process has been a challenge. That having been said, I think the period from the Eurozone financial crisis to manifestly 2016 to the vote on UK's exit from the European Union has certainly raised questions about the sustainability of the project, or whether in fact there is a need to recalibrate it, reconfigure it, whatever. India and the European Union, and at this point I'll refer to the EU, India and the European Union are, for their specific reasons, enthusiasts of multipolarity. India has never appreciated being forced to choose between alignment with one, the other, the third, whatever. And I think for different reasons, Europe, representing as Europe does, wealth, influence, power, has also been uncomfortable with being not acknowledged as an important entity, and hence the enthusiasm for multipolarity. So this is something that we share. India and the EU will continue to regard each other as important partners, and India's relationship with the European Union is, to my mind, not contingent on either the India-UK relationship or the EU-UK relationship. I think all of these are going to be pursued equally. I think the last point I'd like to make is that for the years that the European project, in its various forms and manifestations, was regarded as the most successful project, the European approach to international issues, to global issues, was regarded as the ideal one. In a sense, it was regarded that all evolution will be in that direction, that European values are universal values, European approaches are universal approaches. I think that approach is now open to question at the very least. So I think these are really the broad points I'd like to make at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujata. All of you have been very good with time, and I'd hope that you would help me further, because I would really like to open this up for a Q&A. So I'm going to do a very rapid second round with all of you. And drawing upon what all of you have said, ask you to just take it a little further. Christian, let me start with you. You said Europe is not retreating. Jozsef, you pointed out there are family troubles. Stevens, you said unity is more important. Geoffrey, you pointed out that you cannot have these 4 freedoms function in the way they did with especially the mobility. And I think the most important over here among all these points was also the point which Sujata said about why Europe adds value to international relations and the way we conduct business. And more importantly, what the point you said was Europe is not taken, its contribution is not taken seriously enough, I think, because it's also what the rest of the world looks at it. If there's one point you would like to take ahead in terms of all of these distinctions that we're drawing, I mean, Europe continues, or the European Union continues to be relevant, but within these, tensions which exist, Christian, how do you see now with the global strategy moving ahead? Too ambitious?
No, not at all. Necessary at this time. But just very briefly to comment, the reference from our Hungarian friend on family troubles, I can't remember who he was, who said that all happy families are happy the same way, and all unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. There is, of course, family trouble in Europe. It's a large and diverse family, so you expect to have growing pains at different stages, but you deal with them. I don't recognize at all a static EU that is unchanged since 60 years. I think, in fact, what's characterized the EU is constant change and transformation, constant revision of the way we do business, with often a degree of ambition to do more business, usually at the request of our member states. Now, there is a feel that we need to push more strongly our role on the international stage, that we want to draw on all the instruments we have, including our internal policies, and see more clearly how they can impact positively on what we do abroad in the context of multilateralism and in the context of trying to support stability, security, and ultimately prosperity on the global stage as well. I thought it was rather curious, we heard it also yesterday, the issue of the UK breaking free from the European Union to be able to trade freely. There's no freer trade organization in the world than the EU. It's always championed opening of markets. It's always opened its own markets. We try to go further. We have gone further. We'd like, as you know, to progress in that area with India and with a number of other partners in Asia as well. Happy to see that the UK will continue on that path, and confident that we will find an appropriate arrangement between ourselves and the UK as they leave. But ultimately, I think that we want to convey a message to the rest of the world, to our partners here and in many other parts of the world, that while the institutions may be confusing, seen from the outside, the process continues and the ambition remains high to engage, to promote our common values, to work multilaterally, because that is the best way also to secure stability and prosperity for Europe.
Thank you, Christian. Geoffrey, if I turn to you, as a member of parliament, it imposes certain conditions. It's one of the very critical institutions of the European Union. But the people in Britain have spoken. in a particular way, and there are implications, both for Britain and for the rest of the European Union. How do you see the way ahead?
Well, the fact is, you see, I think some of those that stand up for the European institutions are in denial because the European Union, as it's structured and the directions that it's going in at the moment, are clearly not working. If we look at the state of the economies across Europe, 1% GDP growth at best in many of those economies. In the case of Greece, of course, negative growth over the last few years. We're seeing massive unemployment. In France, for example, 10% unemployment. In countries such as France, such as Spain and Italy, youth unemployment is running at over 45%. So it is clearly not working as an economic model. It is not working as a security model, and people are not happy about other aspects such as free movement that I've already mentioned. So the European Union's got to change. The trouble is that every time there's a crisis, the institutions of the European Union see a crisis as an opportunity to take forward further political integration. Whereas actually what people are asking for is less of that and a reset, a refocus. And some people describe this as populism. I've heard populism defined as what people call popular policies that they don't approve of. And I think that's probably quite a good definition. We have to recognize that the citizens in many of the European countries are not content with the way things are going. And I think this is very dangerous because the European Union needs to respond to those particular concerns, and it's not doing it. And that's one reason why we had Brexit.
Mm-hmm. Jozsef, Geoffrey says the EU needs to reset and reform, and Christian just pointed out the European Union is a work in progress, and that I think more emphatically than ever since we've seen the developments shows that many obituaries have been written for the EU, but it's too early, and it's the greatest asset is when crisis comes, it emerges as a phoenix again.
Unfortunately, I understood only the second part of the question, but I could imagine why you asked me. First of all, if you allow me, I would like to say a half a sentence to universal values and whether the European Union is representing these universal values or not. It is important because probably a Central or Eastern European, as like I am, we have different, probably a little bit more sensitive ears for the statement of the Madam Secretary. So we are coming from a, thanks God, non-existing Eastern Bloc. And when I was young, it was always taught us that we are representing the universal values and the rest of the world has no one task to learn from us. So this is something where Europeans have to be very, very careful. Indeed, we managed to have a very successful form of cooperation. I think it is still successful. 27 countries plus Great Britain, but they are leaving. We could manage a huge amount of issues, and we have common answers for a lot of problems. But if we think that this is the ever best model, the humanity only have to learn from us. So if we try to have carry out an ideology-driven foreign policy, we are making big mistakes. We are in the biggest democracy of the world, India, with different nations. I don't know how many languages, probably 30, probably more. And you also managed to keep this country together in democratic manners. So European Union has a model. This is an offer, but this is not an obligatory offer. And another point, we have common values, and Hungary is often criticized that we are not solidar, we do not show enough solidarity. You could see that we avoid one issue to discuss it too intensively, namely migration. But if you allow me, I would like to say one sentence to that point, because it shows the lack of effective adjusting of our crisis management in the European Union. We always have problem in the European Union when we are leaving our common law, our acquis communautaire. And exactly it happened 1.5 years ago. And that's why my country and a high number of the member countries are for deepening of our integration in fields of security, internal and external security, or solidarity, or economic cooperation. There are many fields. But we also say that the most important point is that every member of the European Union is committed to carry out our common law. Solidarity can't be seen one-sided. Solidarity does not mean that we have to act like the Germans or the Austrians or the Swedish or other member countries. In fields where are we strong, we can provide our strongness. Hungary is a good example. We are able to protect our external border. This is a Schengen external border. It costs a lot. We have 8,000 soldiers day by night and protecting the external border of the European Union. It costs a fortune. Other countries can provide solidarity in a different way. So my answer for the half of the question is that we have to be careful with some ideas that the European Union is presenting something which is the only role model for the rest of the world. We have to learn from our partners, and we'll have to learn, first of all, from our mistakes we made, and we have a great future. I'm quite sure that in spite of these struggles we have, we will manage it, and we will be also a good partner for India and for other countries here in the region. Thank you.
Stephen, we're all living in the same house, or the Europeans are all living in the same house, different dreams. At the end of the day, everybody wants prosperity, stability, peace, and growth for Europe. So is it about redesigning the social contract?
In part it is for the European Union. Economic transformation from the mid-70s onwards in Western Europe and ahead of the enlargement of 2004, also in Central and Eastern Europe, has been driven by a neoliberal economic agenda which has been divorced to a great extent from the social dimension. I think what we see here at this junction in time are two things. One, an elite-driven European project which has traditionally suffered from a gap of democratic legitimacy at the European level, which is now eroding further into a legitimacy gap as a result of people's expectations that they will be able to keep their jobs, that they will not be transferred overseas, that they will not be socially dislocated, etc. So a political and social contract indeed is necessary at EU level. This is what I implicitly refer to when saying that the European Union ought to listen to its citizens, for sure, and show added value where it indeed can do so, and I'm fully in line with what has been said before. By the same token, it needs to be more flexible in its approach. It's true that certain member states do not wish to go in the direction of ever closer Europe, or European Union rather. the European Union and its institutions should learn from the expression, not just in British elections, referenda, but also in plebiscites around the continent, and be more responsive in this respect. Final point, I think functional integration has always driven the European integration project forward, as was just mentioned. The European Union and cooperation between the 28 member states in the areas of economic security, homeland security, external security provide areas where the European Union can add value to what the individual member states cannot do on their own.
Thank you, Stephen. I'd like to ask Sujata, how do you see it now that we are? You have a very vantage position. For somebody who's been following Europe for a long time, as you do and I do, I just think that there is an expectation gap at this point. Would you think that is the right way, or do you want to elaborate?
Well, let me put it like this, that some of the points that have just been made are part of and are relevant to an intra-Europe conversation. Because these are issues that the different constituent parts of Europe, whether nation states or other forms of association, have to determine the outcome for their own good. But let us not forget that this conversation is happening within global ferment and global uncertainty. And therefore, the outcome of what Europe decides will have a bearing on the global conversation, but equally the other way about. And it is important, I think, for both parts, i.e. the global conversation and the subset of the European conversation, to be aware of and conscious of these interrelationships. There is also an intellectual component that Europe brings to the global conversation, and I think we should recognize that and appreciate that. And the specific example I would like to cite at this point is that of the problem of climate change. Now, Europe gave a certain salience to this issue and gave a certain momentum to the debate. But let's not forget that what was decided in Paris in 2015 was not a European construct of the global response. So that is the point that I'm trying to illustrate, that there are interests, there are values, there are approaches which transcend Europe, which exceed Europe, but which help, which Europe can help bring together. The last point I'd like to make, and that is one that I think, again, those of us who are on the outside, who are non-European, face, that by the time a European consensus emerges on an issue, presumably the negotiation and debate within Europe has been so complex and complicated and extended that they don't necessarily wish to debate it with others. And that is a recipe for an impasse. Because those of us who are not European are not going to be in a position to accept whatever Europe has determined is the right outcome. So that, I think, is something that is relevant. And the last point that I would like to make is that relates to another issue which is very current on the global agenda, and that is one of refugee movements and migration. Again, I would like to say that some of what is happening is a reflection of a problem that is sensed within Europe, but there is a larger setting to this. This moment is not the one to discuss it. But what I do want to flag is that there is a larger setting to this, that there are other interests in this. And the European perspective is not the defining one on this subject. And with that, I'll end.
Thank you so much for saying that, the European consensus has to include a lot more other voices and bring on. We are really running short of time. I am, at the margin of the coffee break. I have been signaled I would be guillotined. If there's any one sharp question, just one, very quickly.
Hello. I wanted to ask the panel if anyone had a comment on whether the European Union, or indeed how can the European Union survive as an organisation which by its nature requires compromise and middle ground in an era where political opinions on any side of the spectrum appear to be getting ever more polarised with their own version of facts, reality, and just people talking past each other.
Okay, thank you so much. I think you heard the panel saying that the EU will survive, but if anybody in the panel would like to just respond to it.
There is one short sentence for your question, because there is no time to deepen this problem. The European Union is a unity in diversity. A unity in diversity. We always had different views on different issues. And if you are flexible enough and understand us, that the basis for our cooperation is our common law. This is the lowest common denominator, the European law. And if we see the European Union as a family with one contract, we have already survived. But the problem is that our competitors are going to become stronger and stronger. So it's a question how we can become again attractive and competitive. We will survive, but I'm not sure that in this performance we are showing we'll be able, my EU or our EU, as Hungary, think about this, competitive enough. And this is the real question. Excuse me for giving back to you the question.
Yes, okay. Yes, please.
Hello, thank you very much for your insightful inputs. My name is Dalia Lama. I'm one of the young Raisina Fellows. I have a question. You like the notion in the panel is that the European Union will survive. And talking about the future, what comes to my mind is scenarios. How would, like, could you maybe give more concrete examples of how the European Union would look like, and give concrete scenarios? That's my first question. And the second one is related to actually timing. I think when does the European Union need to come to does the European Union need to find its own role in future to not lose touch with the new global powers centers? Thank you.
With Samir's permission, I'm going to use the chair's prerogative and say maybe the Raisina young fellows can have a whole scenario discussion. We will get all the panelists in and we will run you a scenario, but at least please join me in thanking my panel, and I'd like to thank all of you for your attention.